Welcome to the Authority File, the podcast that features conversations about the life cycle of scholarly communication. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. In this series, which is brought to you with generous support from Taylor and Francis, we're going to be talking about open research and how libraries can play an important role in supporting it. Farther upstream than open access, open research is a collaborative, transparent research workflow. As open access strives to make accessibility to scientific output more universal, open research works in a similar way with the research process itself. And lately, libraries are finding that they can occupy a unique role in providing services for their research communities, such as informatics, data management, and navigating reproducibility requirements. My guests for the next 4 episodes include Natya Hans, Informatics and Reproducibility Librarian, Academic Research and Consulting Services Department at the University of Florida, Emily McElroy, Vice President of Academic Relations at Taylor and Francis, and Jamie Hutchins, Director of Open Research Americas at Taylor and Francis. In this third episode of our series, we have a more in-depth conversation about the ways in which libraries, no matter what size, can support open research, including the unique skill sets necessary to work with research offices. So I want to talk about, just bringing it down to some concise action steps, that libraries and publishers are taking to facilitate open research. Starting with the libraries, Emily and Natya, just talk about or itemize some of the ways that libraries actually do assist with open research. We don't have to go too far into describing them because I think we'll talk about those in a little bit, but in a little more detail. But just kind of, if you were to itemize some of the ways, what would those look like?
Well, I certainly think that librarians can help faculty, especially early career researchers, develop best practices regarding author rights, identify appropriate repositories, and
Mhm.
determine what people should avoid, such as problematic journals or publishers. The issues around research integrity are increasing at an exponential rate,
Yeah.
and it allows librarians to partner with their universities to provide education, whether it's from avoiding errors to intentional misconduct. And just like how I mentioned before about Force 11, I I heard a lot of examples of librarians actively working with faculty on strategies around data and publications to even taking it to funder level conversations about open research, such as Christy Holmes at Northwestern University, who's one of, among others, who's participating with NIH's Office of Data Science Strategies GRAY initiative by developing a framework and infrastructure across generalist repositories.
Mm.
So I think that there are a lot of things, and I'm sure Natya, you have some examples too.
Yeah. I like the examples of like when you said, Emily, about identifying appropriate venues for publishing. So avoiding predatory journals, making sure that the journals you are actually disseminating your research are high impact, or if not, they're actually, they have some impact in your community as well. Libraries also have avenues for open publishing options that we are promoting all the time. We also provide data management support, making sure that there's awareness and promotion of like different data repositories that people can use, which are open and freely and accessible to all the researchers. And the department that I work in, we also provide a lot of services from start to finish. So starting from the inception of an idea of a research project, so we provide like services like data management, data visualization, informatics help. When you're thinking in terms of research and impact as well, we also provide services along all the entire research lifecycle.
Hmm.
And also, I should also add, like, we also provide help with organization of data and metadata as well, because those are two very different things that we think about.
Nice. Yeah, good point. I do want to make sure, we talk about some of this and include the smaller libraries in this. Where if we're um, rather than the big research institutions, how might what kinds of unique challenges, I guess, do smaller libraries have with accommodating open research, and what are the areas where they might be particularly able to provide some assistance in that?
So I'll take this one.
Sure.
I can't think of a library that isn't struggling to maintain current staffing levels, let alone hiring in specialized areas that support open research. And these challenges are even greater at smaller libraries because of typically their personnel budgets are often smaller and recruitment can
Hmm.
be more challenging depending on their location. But at the same time, having worked at smaller institutions, I do think it creates a more agile environment because you are often working more closely with individual faculty and their publishing interests just based on the sheer size of the population that you're serving. But also research offices are, well, all research offices are likely short staffed, but even more so at a smaller institution and really welcome assistance. And it can be easier to have conversations about the value that libraries can bring to an institution that has a growing research profile. But wherever you are in the scholarly ecosystem, there's a strain to the system. So this is where partnerships are even more important, especially for those smaller libraries. So whether it's between libraries, consortia, publishers, providers who provide tools, and nonprofit organizations who advocate for standards and education. And one benefit of a larger institution is you are often part of a larger network, such as ARL, where you can participate in those larger discussions or task forces working in areas around open research. So I've found that organizations often overlook these smaller libraries and their innovative work because they just have a bias about reputation or that budget. So I would, if there's one thing I could advocate for, is that people take a closer look at the great work that's happening in the R2 or R3 level libraries because they're providing some fantastic work.
Excellent. Thank you, Emily. In the cases where libraries are fortunate enough to hire staff with unique backgrounds, and Natya, you're one of those hires. Um, can you and Emily describe the unique skills that are needed to work with research offices, and how those skills might reflect the opportunities that libraries have um, to support open research?
I think other than the actually having the skills to support researchers, having a broader and multidisciplinary perspective definitely helps. Understanding of the research infrastructure, not at just your institution, but at a broader level as well, definitely helps. Making sure that you understand institutional goals around research and what are their um, deliverables essentially. Understanding how the research offices and compliance works and how libraries can actually support and work with them and collaborate with them and partner with them essentially, that definitely helps a lot.
Hmm.
So having a very big picture perspective before going into a role like that will help. Having information about grants, having information about or interest in grants, if not information at least, or understanding, talking to the research offices, talking to the IT and all the other supporting organizations that actually provide research support definitely helps
Hmm.
because it's complex how we navigate, how the researchers can navigate. It's already complex for the researchers to navigate these scenarios. So in any way we can help them, I think that's helpful. That's where the roles of the libraries actually come in play as well.
Yep.
Yeah, and I would say as an administrator, former administrator, it's important to encourage the blending of cultures from someone who has experience in a lab environment to a
Hmm.
library culture. At one institution, we were hiring a basic sciences liaison who decided that bench science wasn't for her. And she brought perspective to the library um, on what life is like for the basic sciences researcher. She could speak their language And she really helped us alter our approach for working with that community. And sure, we invested time in describing how to handle traditional liaison skills such as literature searching. But I think as a PhD student, she already had assisted or actually led classroom instruction and was trained as a practitioner in a lab through working on her dissertation and publications on using things like NCBI resources that surpassed experiences of an entry level librarian who had zero academic experience. So, but it is kind of bringing those cultural differences
Right.
together. That's really important.
Yep. Nice. Natya, I just want to go back to you. Can you talk a little bit about, what attracted you to your position in the library? Like what was, what was appealing to you in that respect?
I actually get this question a lot. Because it's because I come from, again, very non-traditional library background, because
Right.
I was a researcher for the longest part of my career. I think the while even I was in doing my PhD, I actually had a lot of like service roles that I provided, and I think I really enjoyed that a lot. So helping out my other fellow graduate students who were struggling with visualization or some code or some data analysis, I actually helped them out a lot, and I think that's where I found the most comfort and most instant gratification, honestly. So the roles, the support role, the research support role that libraries provide actually felt very natural to me, because this is my area of expertise, and I felt so much comfortable. And every single time I do a new consultation is always challenging, because it's always something new. I learn in the process a lot as well. But I also know that this is something I can help the researcher with. So that makes me really, really happy about.
Excellent. Thank you. Um, Jamie, back to you real quick. Just what's your perspective on how TNF has adjusted its, editorial approach essentially to open research? What kinds of internal workflows have been altered, if at all, to accommodate this approach?
There's actually a lot of parallels to the last answer we were just talking about there with the library. We have an entire group now called the Open Research Group. So
Mm-hmm.
that their entire focus is to look at our policies, look at our technology, the guidelines that we issue, the way we change practice. Those people come from the research community. So they, again, like Natya, they understand what it's like to be a researcher. And that's really important for us to design our sort of editorial processes around that. There's some really obvious things as well, like some of the acquisitions we've made over the years, like F1000 and PHA was more recently. Right. They operate non-traditional approaches, and we're being informed by those non-traditional approaches and then adapting those to what we perhaps, I don't think we want to call legacy journals, because they're moving forward at a rapid rate too. But yeah, so the key things there really are around designing a whole workflow around open research. So F1000 research was designed specifically to capture or give a publishing venue for content that wouldn't otherwise sit in a journal. Mm-hmm. So to bring it to the forefront, to offer opportunities to publish throughout the research lifecycle. So not just waiting till the end of your project to publish an article, but to also talk about your hypotheses, your protocols, your methods, to offer data notes and to write around the software you've created as well, and to link to those software and those data. The other thing is around pre-printing. So that was something that when I started in editorial, that constituted pre-publication. So mm-hmm. it basically said if you had pre-printed, you could no longer submit to this journal. That's shifted massively now. So pre-printing is almost an accepted part of, certainly in our workflows, it's an accepted part of what we anticipate anybody to have done, and we encourage that now. So we have our own preprint service in Verichive. That's something we just launched with the Gates Foundation, and then we've added levels of service on top of a typical preprint, which generally doesn't have editorial checks. Mm-hmm. So we've added like our expertise. And added 20 or so additional research integrity checks to that preprint. So that, again, we're looking at research integrity as being one of our core roles here. And then there's lots of other things as well, but we could go into it for a long time here. But it's lots of things around policy statements, staying aware of things like the use of generative AI and having policies around those, being able to detect the use of AI or manipulation in images, issues and standards around authorship and contributorship, because that changes in an open research environment. You may not be an author, but you certainly were a data analyst, for instance.
Right.
So do you get acknowledged? And then probably just the last thing as well, version control. So if you introduce a preprint, then the author accepted manuscript is also a different version of that preprint. It's gone through some kind of change. The version of record is no longer the final version of record if you, for instance, like F1000 research, you allow the author to then respond to open peer review. So they're allowed to update, and then it becomes the next version of that article. So things like that are becoming a big part of what we focus on, and much more engagement as an industry now on how we collaborate across an industry and don't just compete with each other.
One quick follow-up on that regarding the versioning. Has there been a standardization of that process where, so like it's easy to see right up front, like what version of that piece of research you're looking at?
Yeah, there's been progress made on that. And it continues to develop as new models increase. So there are publications like eLife, which are really pushing a very different agenda and a different way of evaluating content. They're not taking an editorial decision as such. So they're not making decisions based on novelty. And so that changes the flow of content, and I just described from preprint through to hopefully a final version of record.
Yep.
But also, as we see with issues of research integrity, some of those issues are not malpractice, they're not intentional, they're mistakes that were honestly introduced that you identify post-publication. So there are questions about whether you then allow updates or is it republication. But there are industry level initiatives now to look at the versioning, and they're led by NISO. And so most major publishers, libraries, and other stakeholders are part of that working group to identify the versions.
You just heard from Natya Hans, Informatics and Reproducibility Librarian in the Academic Research and Consulting Services Department at the University of Florida, Emily McElroy, Vice President of Academic Relations at Taylor & Francis, and Jamie Hutchins, Director of Open Research Americas at Taylor & Francis. This episode was brought to you with generous support from Taylor & Francis. Join us next week when we explore ways libraries can help navigate open research policies, how open research can improve research integrity, and what a post-collections world may look like. As always, underwriting opportunities for the Authority File podcast are directed by Choice's advertising director, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced and edited by Choice's digital media producer, Sabrina Kofer, with support from digital media assistant, Ashley Roy. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.